This is an RNZ podcast.
Anyway, we better get on to the topics at hand, I suppose. And, of course, the big story of the week, US versus Israel versus Iran. And I'm sure to say US, Israel versus Iran. And I guess the possibility of wider war, which seemed to be very, very almost, going to be happening at the weekend, but it seems to have calmed down a wee bit. But the tricky part for media, of course, is working out what's true. What's not? The fog of war, as they call it.
Yeah, the fog of war. It's I heard it referenced so many times, I looked it up, and it goes back. It's a military term, I think, but a couple of hundred years of history of it. It's been adopted by the media. And it's interesting that nowadays, for all the real-time satellite technology, GPS and all of that, it's still very hard to work out, what's really happened or even happening in war. I've been listening to some podcasts and hearing some editors talk about it. The BBC Media Show had an interesting episode about that sort of stuff. But old stages, it's interesting, and I'll include myself in that, have been harking back to previous conflicts, and even in that region. Gavin Ellis, this week, the former New Zealand Herald editor, in his weekly comment said the fog of war, the fog is expected to be widespread and persistent. Older viewers will recall a similar weather system that developed in 2003 when visibility was impaired for many weeks. It lingered over the Gulf states, and the trigger point, of course, was the Iraq War.
Of course, that was the weapons of mass destruction kept coming up with the claims that proved to be wrong and, in fact, quite fabricated in the run-up to that war, really, weren't they?
Yes, in the wash-up, which took quite some time to really establish. There was a single source called Curveball that was taken at face value, in part because certain parties had an interest in maybe exaggerating the threat or seizing on evidence that seemed to indicate there was weapons of mass destruction. So it all rebounded on the media in the end. The likes of the New York Times and Washington Post had to apologise to their readers. And remember, for broadcasters, Dan Rather, I think he was CBS News, but he kind of spoke for a lot of them and saying, yes, we were too credulous. And a lot of hand-wringing went on after that from the media.
But it was a bit late, really, by then.
Well, it was, but part of that, and one of the differences here is the march to war, if we could call it that, back in 20 years ago, that unfolded over months. This seems like a very sudden build-up that's happened without very much time to check. And I saw clips being played in a BBC program the other day referencing the British satire show In the Loop, or the movie version of the Malcolm Tucker extremely sweary program all about spin. They made a special movie version, and it's satire, obviously, and this is no time for trying to make jokes out of anything, obviously, but what it's sending up there is just how over a long, long period of time people were going backwards and forwards across the Atlantic, British and American politicians swapping notes, trying to find a form of words, that ended up being something they could agree on as a pretext for war. It really did go on for a very long time, and I was in Washington for a short time in the run-up to war when people knew this was going on. And I'd been working at the BBC before that when, again, all that was happening. And it was after I left, the whole dodgy dossier affair, so-called, kind of blew up, the sexed-up information about WMDs ready in 45 minutes that had been dropped into official documents. That ended up toppling a Director General of the BBC because it wasn't well handled, but it ended up that reporting was correct.
So, why is it so hard to get truthful, verified information in this conflict? We're in 2025. You think that would be easy, wouldn't you?
Yeah, in spite of all the technology and information sharing and that relative ease of doing it. Mainly because official sources in all of this from Trump downwards have to be taken with a pinch of salt. And I'm not trying to be funny here, but especially Donald Trump, because so many of his statements, just prove to be things you cannot rely on. And apart from within Israel, the other thing is journalists have almost no way to get accurate on the ground first-hand information. They just try and cross-check things, and then media organisations get experts in to kind of test it, see what looks right. The Economist magazine pointed out, among others, Israel really knows how to work this too, because they've effectively blocked world media from entering Gaza in reliable numbers for the past almost 2 years that conflict's been going on. But Iran is a particularly difficult case because state TV was attacked with one of the missiles, I think, while there was an anchor on air. That footage is pretty dramatic, but they've been, their monitored output, they say, has been pretty thin on real information and heavy on kind of unverifiable claims and some straight out propaganda. They have had a lot of reporters there, foreign nationals and agency bureau staff, but over the years it's been very difficult for them. A lot of them are kind of dual nationals, was a way of getting around it, but Iran had cracked down on them, expelled a lot over the last few years, so that hasn't helped, not having those people here who could help. And that's particularly what makes it really difficult.
Channel 9, they blundered a bit too, didn't they?
Yes, they read out a statement. I think the words were, yes, Americans should expect greater damage and blows now than ever before in human history. They attributed to that to Iran's supreme leader. That was on Sunday, and people went around cross-checking. Did anyone else reported this? And turned out they hadn't. No one's really sure where that claim came from. So this is, the fog of war. This is how all this sort of stuff can come out. And, it takes a while in the wash-up to find out what's really going on.
And, of course, Iran, not known for its freedom on the internet or, Wi-Fi, has that all been clamped down on as well? Yeah,
that's been, some of it's been disrupted by attacks, but also, yes, it's I think there's control of that too. But it has still been possible to communicate, and that is one other source that's been happening. So I've got a clip here which I thought was interesting. This is the Middle East correspondent for the ABC of Australia, Alison Horn. She's actually picked either a good time or bad time. Well, let's call it a good time. She's on maternity leave, so you wouldn't want to be expecting to be in a war zone. So, better off that she's at home, I would guess. But she kind of reactivated some of her online contacts in Iran using encrypted message systems, and she put this in an ABC broadcast on Sunday.
It was already hard to talk with people on the ground in Iran. Foreign journalists are rarely allowed in.
But in pockets of connectivity, I've reached some of my contacts.
This American attack, I can't stop my tears. This is the war. Nobody knows what will happen next.
Yeah, so getting a hold of people that way when you can, when the connectivity allows, that's been really helpful. And we've heard, Morning Report, for example, has been able to source interviews with people and relatives who have been able to contact people, relay that. So piece by piece it can come out still.
Can come out, yeah. Now, finally, you actually just alluded to it, a viewing recommendation.
Yeah, this is the one I mentioned. This is it's an epic 24-part series on the Cold War that was bankrolled by Ted Turner, the founder of CNN and Turner Broadcast Systems. After the wall came down, he became obsessed with this and spent a lot of money hiring top journalists to write all the episodes. He got Kenneth Branagh to narrate it, who he does quite a good job. But what he did was he spent some of this acquisition may have been a bit dodgy, but he went to archives behind the Iron Curtain once those countries had opened up when the wall came down, and got some extraordinary footage. I mean, you think you've seen all this historic stuff from the past, over and over in documentaries and History Channel and so on, but he's got stuff in there that's really extraordinary, as well as the first-hand testimony of politicians from countries in Hungary, Romania, even Fidel Castro's in it, senior Russian Politburo guys who are still alive in the late 1990s. It's fascinating stuff, and it kind of makes you realise, when people start panicking about World War III, when what happened on Monday kicked off, there's been other flashpoints before, and there is also a history to this that says brinksmanship only goes so far.
Yeah. Now, recently on the Midweek Mediawatch, we heard about an unusual interview at the Beehive. This was the one between John Campbell from TVNZ and the incoming Deputy Prime Minister at the time there, David Seymour. And it was really strange because it was filmed and aired by both parties, and it's been back in the news yet again. It
has indeed. So we've got a couple of clips for you. This is how that got underway when David Seymour marched into the Beehive Theaterette.
I gather you used the C word in reference to how we were supposed to regard you.
I don't think I did that. Come here.
Fair enough. Maybe it was a misunderstanding.
Some sort of misunderstanding. Let's see. And it seemed like David Seymour was trying to throw John Campbell off his stride a little bit like that while they were putting the microphones on and getting ready. But what became obvious was that David Seymour had, as he does now frequently, brought in someone with him from the ACT party to film their exchange, and that was for ACT's own social media channels.
So, Andy, hi, Andy. Nice to see you. So, Andy is rolling on this. This is presumably for David versus the media.
Something like that.
Yeah, for your social media page.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that seems to me to be being very good at politics, right? So what Andy's doing is he's going to put it up.
Well, it's not politics, though. I mean,
no, it is, because it's about speaking directly to your constituency, isn't it? And what are your big views?
We go to duty to be open to people, and what we found is that for years people in the media abused the power to edit.
So there we go, John. You have a bit of an ambush, really, wasn't it? John Campbell disputed that claim there, didn't he? That the media abused their power to edit.
Yes, they had argued about, look, you've got to make a news report. Someone might talk for 7 minutes. You've got to take a bit out of it. You know that. And they had a to and fro about it. In fact, Hayden, my colleague, and Emil on nights on Midweek Mediawatch, had a bit of a go back and forward about that too. And then the interview was posted by the ACT Party itself with the headline, "Weird," in capitals, "Weird Campbell interview. Can we trust the media?" Which wasn't actually the thrust of the interview at all. It was a big, long-ranging interview about ACT achievements, ACT stances, and becoming Deputy Prime Minister and what difference that might make. But Hayden made a point that in trying to do this thing of saying, no, we can't trust you to edit. We're going to put this whole thing online so people can see the raw thing for themselves. That is kind of making a point at the time when the government and the media minister, Paul Goldsmith, is demanding from the likes of TVNZ, RNZ, state-owned broadcasters more trustworthiness and transparency. This is really changing the mood. And actually Jesse Mulligan wrote a Substack post about it, which was quite thoughtful, and saying, in this sort of clickbait style web posting, these headlines, who wouldn't want to see something weird? And in fact, the interview wasn't all that weird. It was a bit of a clash. But back in the news, because late last week, David Seymour's kind of ramped up his argument against the media and its trustworthiness.
How did he do that?
Oh, this was in one of those donation requests that parties, not just ACT, but parties often send out when there's an issue. They'll seize on an issue and say, this is why we need your support, because we're the ones campaigning on this. So they sent out to people on their mailing list an email from David himself. It says this: the days of reporting the facts and letting Kiwis make up their own minds are long gone. Fewer and fewer people are watching the 6 o'clock news, listening to Morning Report, or sitting through Mihi Narangi Forbes' latest taxpayer-funded pseudo-documentary. That's a reference to an edition of Mata Reports, which we also talked about here on Midweek Mediawatch, where she doorstepped him in Parliament. He says Kiwis are now turning in ever greater numbers to alternative sites, social media, YouTube, etc. We are bypassing the media, but I need your support, he said to the recipients of this newsletter, to go around the media and speak directly to New Zealanders.
So basically he's fundraising specifically to do this.
Yep, absolutely, specifically. He says, on ACT's YouTube channel, you can hear what we're actually saying, uncut and unedited, not what the journalists say. And then he, cites again that John Campbell recent interview for TVNZ.
So was there anything unfair about that interview in his mind?
Well, in his mind, he cited specifically, look, in that big long interview we did, TVNZ did not broadcast or include an exchange we had about Māori life expectancy. John Campbell had said, look, it's lower because of the effects of colonisation. David Seymour claims he won that argument with a counterclaim that Asian New Zealanders live longer than Pākehā. Now, that can't be because of colonisation. And he says that, not surprisingly, TVNZ cut almost all of that out of the policy discussion. Would they have published the full interview? He asks his supporters. If ACT hadn't filmed it too, you decide, he says.
So what is your thought? Do you think they would have?
The Herald and the Media Insider column last weekend raised that with TVNZ. They said, look, that interview and a companion one with Winston Peters, the two deputy PMs, they were made available at the same time and in full, they say, on TVNZ Plus before an edited version went out on One News at 6, as you would expect, news show short reports. Yep. They say these have been available for weeks and in advance of the ACT Party posting its own footage. ACT say, says TVNZ, ACT say they are concerned about the shaping of narratives, but we are providing exactly what they would like to see, the full unedited story, allowing viewers to make up their own mind. And because, in that interview, David Seymour had said, look, we're getting great numbers of viewers online for our social media videos, whilst, he kind of crowed about this to John Campbell. The ratings are tanking for the likes of Morning Report and One News. He said, I'm paraphrasing, but it was words to that effect. And so a TVNZ spokesperson said One News at 6 had not seen any notable decline in audience.
Was he happy with that, David Seymour?
Well, he didn't believe it. He said they were delusional. So TVNZ said, yeah, we're happy. We regularly reach 1 million viewers. We serve all New Zealanders, irrespective of the party they vote for, etc. David Seymour said, no, they must be using some sort of cumulative figure. And then he went on more about the power to edit. And he said, look, there's quite a long email, quite an intense one. As more people tune out of legacy media and turn to platforms like ours, the ACT parties, the message is clear: report the facts or lose your audience. And he says, those who aren't do it, their viewership is plummeting. The market is working, he says.
It's a question. I'm ambushing you here now. Do we know how many people actually watch the ACT Party YouTube? Is there any idea about that?
Well, numbers vary, but yes, they do get sizable numbers for some of their YouTube videos on those channels. So it's working for them for sure. But the thing is, this works in parallel with actual news outlets, right? And I think sort of always has. So legacy media, the likes of RNZ's news programs, TVNZ news, big news programs like that, we know habits are going away from 6 p.m. news, and so over time these are kind of mega trends that the media haven't been able to buck. There are lots of reasons for it. Only one of those is the existence of alternative news platforms. And I think, when you look at people's online habits and where they spend it, what they spend their time doing on screens or other outlets, these things are additional, not necessarily substitutional. And as we know, a lot of alternative media outlets actually feed off each other. The professional news media, so-called, might generate stories that are then talked about more, criticised more by alternative outlets who claim the full story is not being told, and so on. But what was interesting in this fundraising email, David Seymour took it a bit further. He said, taxpayer-funded media don't get the message unless we send it to them. That's why we delivered a significant funding cut to RNZ in this year's budget. And that's a bit of a worrying thing for a shareholding minister in TVNZ to say, with also a deputy prime minister.
And the other deputy prime minister, of course, the Honourable Winston Peters, told TVNZ's Jack Tame, didn't he, that it was a while back now, that the government could turn off the tap of funding, remember? That
was in a kind of testy exchange between the two of them. The media minister, regarding RNZ's budget, Paul Goldsmith, he said, look, he explained it as being, look, the RNZ's budget got boosted in 2024 after the failed merger. It went up a lot, I think 27% odd. So basically, paraphrasing again, they got a kind of haircut this time because savings needed to be made across the board and agreed to by Cabinet. The media ministers denied that what Winston Peters said. He's been asked about that too. He said, no, it didn't play into the budget decisions at all. But David Seymour, interestingly, also adds, he said, ACT is the only party in Parliament standing against what he calls Willie Jackson's resurrected media bailout bill, and that's the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill, which Paul Goldsmith has also kind of agreed to support but is now on the back burner. He's explained that that's because of changing tech trends. Maybe it's not the right solution. Also, the possibility, if you are seen to punish or tax an American tech corporation like Google, Mr. Trump will come for you, and there could be tariffs, and that is a worry. But David Seymour is saying it's our principled opposition that means it's been left languishing on the order paper. So, and we need to keep up pressure on our coalition partners to dump it for good. So, there are other reasons he's talking about for that bill not being progressed, or at least according to the media minister, Paul Goldsmith. But David Seymour seems to want to take the credit there.
Just got time for this chat. You had an article that you wanted to share with us, Dame Teresa Gattung.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So this is last Sunday. The Star Times interviewed her about selling her matchmaking company online service called Competico. Back in February 2024, she launched it and said this was because of her own quite miserable experience of dating in the past 5 years when she was looking for companionship. So what it was a kind of premium business. You pay up to $6,000 to be a member, and they match you up with a potential match. And the Sunday Star Times said she's now selling this because, look, she's got other priorities now in health and family. But then there's this telling line. She readily admitted that the business of love hadn't been all plain sailing. And true enough, it was only obliquely or briefly referred to in this piece. But within months of its launch, people started, some went to the media, some women complaining they hadn't received a match. In her interview saying, look, I'm getting out of the business and selling now, she said some of these bad headlines were hard to take.
Was it unfair? I mean, was it damaging to the business?
Well, some of the stories they were saying not enough men, the women were saying to match with, too few events to meet up with them. Bianca Zander on the TVNZ website wrote about it. She said, I'd be delighted to be proven wrong, but after 5 long years on the dating apps, I don't believe there's a Mariana Trench out there of undiscovered single dudes who aren't already on Tinder and those who could afford the premium services of Compatico. She says, well, they're not exactly crying into their iPhones at night because they can't find anyone to match with. So I don't know but whether that's fair enough or whether a premium service was ever going to work. But yes, she seemed to think it wouldn't. And the thing that interested me, though, was that when these stories came up after a few months, it wasn't Teresa Gatting answering the questions. It was other company spokespeople saying, no, this is all bedding in, it's going to work fine. The value at the platinum and gold level of memberships, it's comparable with what you get overseas. And in that exit interview in the Sunday Star Times last weekend, Teresa Gatting did say, look, a couple of these stories are about a shortage of men, and who is interested in there being lots of women? Men. So we didn't see these stories as marketing at the time, but they were actually really helpful. So she's actually saying these bad headlines are hard to take were actually not bad for the business. So I don't know which way this is going, but the reader is reading this thinking, look, is this like a business idea that was either never going to really work or didn't perform that well that she can't fix or no one can? Or is this just a real dating issue for mature people that's a real problem and, could be solved by other means? Don't know.
Well, an expensive problem too, be solved by spending $6,000, was it?
Yeah, Bianca Zander said in her TVNZ write-up, for that, seeing as she's a journalist, for that, I'd want to partner with a Pulitzer. So good to know that's the market value of a Pulitzer Prize if you're on the dating market.
So you mentioned, the criticism. How has the Dame Teresa, responded? Well,
she's still fairly upbeat, saying the business will do okay, but there was a lot of publicity about this at the start. This is TVNZ 7 Sharp and Hilary Barry in February last year before the launch.
There's no swiping left or right. The picking of potential matches is left to a third party. Those who join the company's private database are all vetted and are anonymous to all but the matchmaker. There are 2 membership tiers, either a $6,000 priority service to find you that perfect person, or a $695 option which gets you on the company's private database and gives you access to their singles-only social events.
Yeah, so that sounds a bit like reading out the brochure to me, and this is how Hilary Barry's encounter with Teresa Gatting ended.
Well, I'm not looking for marriage, and I've never wanted to be married. I would like to have an intimate relationship, a long-term partner who shares some of the same interests and values that I do.
And she's now got the perfect platform to find them. Perhaps one addition to the wish list, though. Must love dogs.
Yeah, so good publicity at the start, bit of rough headlines in the middle, and now she's selling out. One slight worry is the new owner says, all my male clients, they're asking for the real Dakota Johnson, and Dakota Johnson is a real actor who played the woman in 50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey,
not quite sure that's the right message either.
Midweek Mediawatch. Thank you, Colin Peacock. Thanks so much.
Mate.